Ricky Gordon stood in the airlock of his battered ship, staring at the cloaked figure that had just offered him the most dangerous job of his life. Getting tangled up with the galaxy's deadliest assassin usually meant a quick trip to an unmarked grave, but Hector had credits, lots of them, and the chance to bloodlessly cripple the Nigean nutjobs who'd been throwing their weight around the colonies. He ran his fingers through his greying hair, his internal debate already settled before he'd made touchdown. The cryptic coordinates, the hooded figure, all of it screamed, set up. But Ricky was broke. Without fuel or funds, the only way back to anything approaching civilization was dealing with the notorious killer in front of him. "I'm not signing a contract, and there's definitely no handshake," Ricky quipped, trying to hide his unease. He'd seen the aftermath of Hector's work, no finesse, just piles of bodies and a lot of spilled blood. Even for a hardened mercenary, it was stomach-turning. Hector's shadowed face crinkled into something approximating a smile. "I wouldn't expect you to. You have honor, Ricky Gordon, a rare thing in our trade." His voice was like a knife sliding across silk. "The quantum cipher will change the balance of power in the quadrant. The Nigean dogs fancy themselves the rightful rulers. With the cipher, any buyer could decimate their command structure. I need your skills and discretion to obtain it." Ricky had a bad feeling about what discretion meant, but kept it to himself. The offer was almost too good. If they pulled it off, he could finally quit taking shady jobs, and maybe even settle down on a half-decent world. But first, he needed to survive a heist on a top-secret military base, steal encrypted alien tech, and not get vaporized by the most lethal being in the known universe. Just another Tuesday. The merc picked up his pulse rifle, checking the charge. "All right, Hector. I'm in, but if you're playing me, I'll make sure to take you down with me. Credits be damned." He didn't wait for a response, heading out of the airlock and into the harsh glare of the alien sun. Inside, all he could think about was how many ways this could go wrong. But out here, you had to push those thoughts down deep. Fear was for the weak or the dead. If he was going to make it out of this mess alive, he'd need every ounce of his strength and wit, because pissing off the Nigean brass was a death sentence he didn't plan to serve today. It was time to show the galaxy what a human could do. Ricky and Hector made their approach to the base, the human's battered ship blending in with the asteroid field debris. Hector tapped a few commands into his gauntlet, cloaking their ship in a shimmer of refracted light. Ricky raised an eyebrow. Assassin tech never ceased to impress. As they neared the outer perimeter, a pack of sentry drones began sweeping the area with scanning beams. Ricky's hands flew across the controls, sending the ship into a dizzying spiral to evade detection. Hector braced himself against the bulkhead, his hidden face unreadable. They managed to slip past the drones, landing in a shadowed crevasse near the base's outer wall. Ricky checked his rifle again as the airlock hissed open. "I've got a bad feeling about this," he muttered. Hector glided past him, his movements fluid and silent. "Your instincts serve you well, human, but we've come too far to turn back now." They crept along the base's perimeter, Ricky's eyes scanning for any sign of movement. A low growl rumbled from the shadows ahead. Ricky froze, his finger hovering over the trigger. A massive beast emerged from the darkness, its 6 eyes glowing with predatory hunger. Ricky had heard stories of the Nigeans' genetically engineered guard dogs, but he'd always dismissed them as exaggeration. Until now. The vortex hound lunged, its maw gaping with razor-sharp teeth. Ricky rolled to the side, firing a burst from his rifle. The shots glanced off the creature's armored hide, barely slowing its charge. Hector moved like a ghost, his blade flashing in the dim light. The hound yelped in pain, its black blood sizzling on the ground. Ricky scrambled to his feet, aiming for the beast's eyes. The hound leapt again, but this time Ricky was ready. He sidestepped the attack, jamming his rifle into the creature's open mouth and squeezing the trigger. The hound's head exploded in a shower of gore, its body twitching as it hit the ground. Ricky wiped the sweat from his brow, his heart pounding. "Let's hope that's the worst of it," he said, trying to steady his breathing. Hector merely nodded, already moving towards the base's main entrance. They slipped inside, the assassins' advanced stealth tech masking their presence from the base's security systems. Ricky followed close behind, his senses on high alert. They wound their way through the labyrinthine corridors, avoiding patrols and surveillance cameras with practiced ease. Finally, they reached the vault room, its reinforced door looming before them like a challenge. Hector went to work on the lock, his tools moving with surgical precision. Ricky kept watch, his rifle at the ready. The door swung open with a hiss, revealing the quantum cipher floating in a stasis field at the center of the room. Ricky stepped forward, his hand outstretched, but before he could touch the device, a cold voice cut through the silence. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, human." General Zarkrath emerged from the shadows, flanked by a dozen heavily armed commandos. The Nijian's face was a mask of barely contained rage, his eyes burning with hatred. "I've caused quite a stir infiltrating my base and killing my pets," Zarkrath snarled. "But your little adventure ends here." Ricky's grip tightened on his rifle, his mind racing. They were outnumbered and outgunned with no chance of escape, but he'd be damned if he was going to let this arrogant bastard win without a fight. Hector moved first, his blade flashing as he lunged at the nearest commando. Ricky dove for cover, firing blindly at the advancing Nijians. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air, scorching the walls and floor. Ricky rolled behind a console, popping up to take aim at Zarkrath. The general was barking orders, his own weapon spitting death. Ricky squeezed the trigger, his shot going wide as a plasma bolt nearly took his head off. Hector was a blur of motion, his blade and tech making short work of the commandos. But even he couldn't dodge forever. A lucky shot caught him in the side, sending him sprawling. Ricky cursed, laying down covering fire as he ran to his fallen partner. "Get the cipher," Hector hissed through gritted teeth, his hand pressed against his wound. Ricky hesitated for a split second, torn between his mission and his unlikely ally. But there was no time for debate. He snatched the cipher from its pedestal, tucking it into his jacket. Zarkrath roared in fury, his remaining commandos closing in. Ricky hauled Hector to his feet, half dragging him towards the door. They stumbled into the corridor, plasma bolts sizzling past their heads. Ricky's mind raced as they ran, trying to remember the layout of the base. They needed a ship, and fast. He spotted a sign for the hangar bay, steering Hector towards it. They burst into the hangar, alarms blaring. Nijin soldiers poured in from all sides, weapons drawn. Ricky spotted a sleek shuttle near the far wall, its ramp lowered invitingly. "There!" he shouted, pointing with his free hand. They made a break for it, plasma fire erupting around them. Ricky felt a searing pain in his shoulder, but he pushed through it, practically throwing Hector into the shuttle's open hatch. He slammed his fist on the ramp control, diving for the pilot's seat as it lifted. His fingers flew over the controls, coaxing the engines to life. The shuttle lurched forward, smashing through crates and equipment as it hurtled towards the hangar doors. Ricky gritted his teeth, pouring every ounce of skill and luck he had into getting them out of there. The shuttle burst from the hangar in a shower of sparks and shrapnel, Nijin fighters already scrambling to pursue. As they rocketed away from the base, Ricky's thoughts were a jumble of fear, exhilaration, and disbelief. They'd done it. They'd stolen the quantum cipher right out from under the Nijians' noses. But at what cost? Hector groaned from the back of the shuttle, his breathing labored. Ricky glanced over his shoulder, taking in the assassin's battered form. They were both in rough shape, and things were only going to get harder from here on out. Ricky turned back to the controls, his jaw set with grim determination. They may have won this battle, but the war was just beginning. And now, with the entire galaxy hunting them, every move they made could be their last. Their stolen shuttle limped through space, the damage from their narrow escape taking its toll. Ricky gripped the controls tight, his knuckles white. The cockpit reeked of burnt circuitry and blood. Hector's blood. The assassin lay slumped in the rear of the shuttle, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Stay with me, you crazy bastard," Ricky muttered. "I didn't drag your ass out of there just to have you die on me." Hector coughed, a wet, hacking sound. Sentiment from you, I'm touched. Ricky snorted. Don't get used to it, we've still got a job to do. He checked the nav computer, cursing under his breath. The Nigean fleet was closing fast, their ships appearing as angry red blips on the screen. They needed help, and fast. Zeph, Ricky said suddenly, she's our only shot. Hector raised an eyebrow. The hacker, you'd trust her? About as far as I can throw her, but she's the best there is. If anyone can crack the cipher, it's her. Ricky punched in the coordinates for the Andromeda cluster, praying that Zeph was still holed up in that seedy space station she called home. It was a long shot, but it was the only play they had. They docked at the station, the airlock hissing open. Ricky half-carried, half-dragged Hector through the grimy corridors, ignoring the curious stares of the station's denizens. He pounded on Zeph's door, his heart sinking when there was no answer. "Looking for your friend," a voice drawled from the shadows. "I'm afraid she's a bit tied up at the moment." Ricky spun, his hand dropping to his blaster. A group of Nigean bounty hunters emerged from the darkness, their weapons trained on him. Now, the leader said, a cruel smile playing across his scaled features. "Let's not do anything hasty. Hand over the cipher and your friend, and maybe we'll let you live." Ricky's mind raced. He couldn't fight his way out, not with Hector in tow. He needed to play this smart. "All right," he said slowly, raising his hands. "You win, but I want to see Zeph first to make sure she's alive." The Nigean considered for a moment, then nodded. "Follow me, and no funny business, or your pretty little hacker gets a plasma bolt between the eyes." They wound their way through the station's underbelly, past flickering neon signs and shady characters. Ricky's skin crawled with unease. He was in the heart of the station's criminal underworld now, and one wrong move could spell disaster. They entered a dingy room, the air thick with the stench of stale sweat and cheap booze. Zeph was there bound to a chair, her face bruised and bloodied. She looked up as Ricky entered, her eyes widening in surprise. "Ricky, what the hell are you doing here?" "Rescuing you, apparently." Ricky turned to the Nigean leader. "All right, I've seen her, now let her go." The Nigean laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "I don't think so, human. See, we need her to track you down. Seems you've got quite the price on your head. The cipher now." Ricky's hand inched towards his blaster, but he knew it was useless. He was outnumbered and outgunned. He needed to stall for time, to come up with a plan. "Ricky," Hector's voice was weak but urgent. "The cipher. It's more than just a bargaining chip. It's the key to everything." Ricky frowned. "What are you talking about?" "The Nigeans, they're planning to invade the human colonies. The cipher, it can unlock their database, prove what they're doing." Ricky's blood ran cold. If what Hector was saying was true, then the stakes were even higher than he'd thought. He couldn't let the cipher fall into the wrong hands. He looked at Zeph, seeing the determination in her eyes despite her battered state. He knew what he had to do. In a blur of motion, Ricky drew his blaster, firing at the nearest bounty hunter. The room erupted into chaos, plasma bolts scorching the air. Ricky dove for cover, dragging Hector with him. "Zeph!" he shouted over the din of battle. "Hack the station's security! Lock it down!" Zeph nodded, her fingers flying over a concealed datapad. The doors slammed shut, trapping the bounty hunters inside. Ricky and Hector fought their way to Zeph, Ricky's blaster spitting death with every shot. They cut Zeph free, Ricky supporting Hector as they made their break for it. They raced through the station's corridors, alarms blaring in their wake. They were almost to the airlock when a familiar figure stepped into their path. General Zarkrath stood before them, his cybernetic enhancements glinting in the dim light. His face was a mask of cold rage, his eyes burning with hatred. "Leaving so soon," he snarled. "I think not. The cipher, human, now." Ricky's grip tightened on his blaster, but he knew it was useless against Zarkrath's augmented form. He had to play this smart. "I've got a better idea," Ricky said, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. "A duel, you and me. Winner takes the cipher." Zarkrath's lips curled in a cruel smile. You would challenge me, human? You are brave, I'll give you that. Foolish, but brave. Ricky handed his blaster to Zeph, stepping forward to face the Nigen general. They circled each other, fists raised, eyes locked in a deadly stare. Zarkrath moved first, his cybernetic fist whistling through the air. Ricky ducked, countering with a brutal uppercut that snapped the Nigen's head back. They traded blows, Ricky's raw strength pitted against Zarkrath's enhanced speed and power. It was a brutal, bloody affair, neither combatant giving an inch, but Ricky had something Zarkrath didn't, the human spirit, the will to fight, to survive against all odds. With a roar of defiance, Ricky launched himself at Zarkrath, tackling him to the ground. They grappled, rolling across the blood-slicked floor. Ricky's fingers found a weak point in Zarkrath's cybernetics, and he tore at it with all his might. There was a shower of sparks, and Zarkrath howled in pain. Ricky pressed his advantage, raining down blows until the Nigen lay still, his cybernetic implants smoking and sparking. Ricky staggered to his feet, his chest heaving. He looked at Zeph and Hector, seeing the awe and respect in their eyes. "Let's get the hell out of here," he said, his voice ragged. "We've got a galaxy to save." They fled the station, the cipher secure in Ricky's jacket. But as they blasted into the void, Ricky couldn't shake the feeling that their troubles were just beginning. The Nigeans would never stop hunting them, and with the fate of the human colonies hanging in the balance, failure was not an option. Ricky looked out at the stars, his jaw set with grim determination. Come what may, he would see this through to the end. For Hector, for Zeph, for all of humanity. Zeph's fingers flew across the datapad, the quantum cipher's secrets unraveling before her eyes. "Got it," she said, her voice tight with excitement and fear. "The Nigen invasion plans, the location of their secret base, it's all here." Ricky leaned over her shoulder, his eyes scanning the decrypted data. "We need to move fast. If the Nigens realize we've cracked their code..." Hector nodded, his face grim. "They'll launch the invasion immediately. We can't let that happen." They set course for the remote planet, a sense of urgency thrumming through the ship. But before they could even enter the system, a massive shadow fell across their view screen. A Nigen battleship, its hull bristling with weapons, loomed before them. "To attention, human vessel," a voice boomed over the comm. "This is Admiral Zavok of the Nigian Imperial Fleet. Surrender now, or be destroyed." Ricky's hands tightened on the controls, but he knew they were outmatched. The battleship's tractor beam locked onto their ship, dragging them into its cavernous hangar bay. Armed Nigen soldiers swarmed the ship, dragging Ricky, Hector, and Zeph out at gunpoint. They were brought before Admiral Zavok, a towering figure in black armor, his cybernetic eye glinting with malice. "Well, well," Zavok said, his voice dripping with contempt. "The infamous Ricky Gordon and his band of traitors. I've been looking forward to this." Ricky spat at Zavok's feet. "Go to hell!" Zavok just laughed. "Oh, I have something much worse planned for you. Take them to the interrogation chamber." The soldiers dragged them away, Hector's face twisting in pain as they jostled his still-healing wounds. They were thrown into a dark room, the walls lined with gleaming instruments of torture. Zavok entered, his gaze fixed on Hector. "You," he said, his voice low and dangerous, "you betrayed your own people, your own father." Hector's eyes widened. "Father?" Zavok backhanded him across the face. "You are no son of mine. You were exiled for your cowardice, your refusal to take part in our glorious conquest." Ricky stared at Hector in shock. He had always sensed a darkness in the assassin's past, but this was beyond anything he could have imagined. Zavok turned to Ricky, his cybernetic eye whirring as it focused on him. "But you, human, you have a chance to redeem yourself. Join us, lead our invasion fleet, crush the human colonies beneath your heel, and I will let your friends live." Hector looked at Ricky, his eyes pleading. Ricky knew what he was asking. To sacrifice himself, to save Zeph and Hector from his father's wrath. For a moment, Ricky was tempted. The thought of Zeph and Ector safe, of the Nigean threat ended, but he knew it was a lie. Zavok would never let them live, and Ricky would never betray his own people. He met Zavok's gaze, his jaw set. "I'll die before I join you." Zavok's face twisted in rage. "So be it!" He turned to leave, but Ector called out, "Wait." Zavok paused, his hand on the door control. "What is it, traitor?" Ector struggled to his feet, his face pale but determined. "I'll do it. I'll lead your fleet." Ricky and Zeph stared at him in horror. "Ector, no," Ricky said. "You can't." But Ector just looked at him, a small smile playing across his lips. "Trust me," he whispered. Zavok's cybernetic eye narrowed. "Very well. But know this, if you betray me again, I will make you watch as I flay the skin from your friend's bones." He gestured to the soldiers. "Take him to the bridge and put these two in the brig." As the soldiers led Ector away, Ricky caught a glimpse of something in his hand, a small metallic device barely larger than a coin. A detonator. Ricky's heart raced as the pieces fell into place. Ector wasn't betraying them. He was buying them time. The soldiers shoved Ricky and Zeph into a cramped cell, the energy bars humming with deadly power. But Ricky's mind was already racing, formulating a plan. "Zeph," he said, his voice low and urgent, "can you hack the cell controls?" Zeph grinned, cracking her knuckles. "Watch me." Her fingers danced over the cell's control panel, her brow furrowed in concentration. The energy bars flickered once, twice, then died. Ricky was moving before they hit the ground, snatching a blaster from a guard's holster and firing point-blank into his chest. Zeph grabbed the other guard's weapon, and together they fought their way through the ship, alarms blaring in their wake. They burst onto the bridge just as Ector drove his blade into Zavok's cybernetic eye. The Admiral howled in pain, his hands clawing at his ruined face. Ector whirled, his other hand slamming the detonator onto the ship's main console. "Run!" he shouted. Ricky and Zeph didn't need to be told twice. They sprinted for the hangar bay, dodging blaster fire and cutting down Nigean soldiers with ruthless efficiency. They could hear the ship's systems failing, the detonator's virus wreaking havoc on its critical functions. They reached the hangar bay just as the ship began to tear itself apart, explosions ripping through its hull. They leaped into the nearest shuttle, Ricky's hands flying over the controls. The shuttle rocketed out of the hangar, the battleship collapsing behind them in a ball of fire and twisted metal. Ricky slumped back in his seat, his heart pounding. They had done it. They had the Sci-Fi and the Nigean invasion plans. They could save the human colonies. But as he looked over at Ector, he saw the pain and conflict in the assassin's eyes, the revelation of his true identity, his father's cruelty. It had taken a toll. Ricky reached out, clasping Ector's shoulder. "Hey," he said, "you did the right thing." Ector met his gaze, a small smile playing across his lips. "I know, but it's not over yet." Ricky nodded, turning back to the controls. Ector was right. They still had to reach the Nigean base, still had to stop the invasion before it began. But for now they had each other, a human and a Nigean bound by a common cause, by friendship, forged in the heat of battle. As they flew towards their final confrontation, Ricky felt a sense of calm settle over him. Come what may, they would face it together. The shuttle shuddered as it touched down on the remote planet's surface, the Nigean base looming before them, like a dark, twisted wound. Ricky and Ector exchanged a glance, their faces grim with determination. They stepped out into the harsh alien landscape, the wind whipping at their clothes. Zeph followed close behind, her datapad clutched tight to her chest. They had barely taken a step when a familiar figure emerged from the base's shadows. Zarkrath, his cybernetic enhancements glinting in the dim light. His face was a mask of cold, implacable rage. "You," he snarled, his voice dripping with venom. "You dare come here after what you've done? After the shame you've brought upon our people?" Ector stepped forward, his hand on his blade. "It's over, Zarkrath. We have the Sci-Fi. We know your plans, you've lost. Zarkrath's laughter was a harsh, grating sound. Lost? No, traitor, I have only begun to fight. He raised his hand, and a swarm of Nijian soldiers poured out of the base, their weapons trained on Ricky and his companions. Ricky cursed under his breath. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but they had no choice. With a roar of defiance, Ricky charged forward, his blaster spitting fire. Hector was a blur of motion at his side, his blade flashing in the dim light. Zeph took cover behind a rocky outcropping, her fingers flying over her datapad as she tried to hack the base's defenses. The battle was fierce, brutal. Nijin's soldiers fell before Ricky's onslaught, but for everyone he cut down, 2 more seemed to take their place. Hector fought like a man possessed, his blade a whirlwind of death and destruction. But even they could not hold out forever. A lucky shot caught Ricky in the shoulder, sending him spinning to the ground. Hector stood over him, his blade flashing as he held off the advancing Nijins. "Go!" Hector shouted, his voice raw with pain and desperation. "Get to the shuttle, I'll hold them off." Ricky struggled to his feet, his vision swimming with pain. "No," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper, "I won't leave you." Hector met his gaze, a small smile playing across his lips. "You have to. The Sci-Fi, the colonies, they need you." Ricky opened his mouth to protest, but Hector cut him off with a fierce embrace. "Go," he whispered, "and don't look back." Ricky felt tears stinging his eyes as he turned away, Zeph at his side. They ran for the shuttle, the sounds of battle ringing in their ears. They could hear Hector's war cry, a sound of pure, defiant rage. They were almost to the shuttle when a dark shape loomed before them. Zarkrath, his face a twisted mask of hatred. He raised his blaster, his finger tightening on the trigger. But before he could fire, a blade sprouted from his chest. Hector stood behind him, his face a mask of grim determination. Zarkrath fell to his knees, his cybernetic eye flickering and dying. Hector staggered forward, his hand pressed to his side. Blood seeped between his fingers, a dark stain spreading across his torn and battered armor. Ricky caught him as he fell, lowering him gently to the ground. "Hector," he said, his voice breaking, "hold on. We'll get you out of here. We'll—" But Hector just smiled, his hand coming up to rest on Ricky's cheek. "No," he said, his voice a fading whisper. "This is where my story ends. But yours is just beginning." His eyes fluttered closed, his hand falling away. Ricky bowed his head, tears streaming down his face. Zeph knelt beside him, her own eyes glistening with grief. They stayed there for a long moment, cradling their fallen friend. Then slowly they rose to their feet. They made their way to the stolen shuttle, Ricky's heart heavy with grief. But as they approached, a familiar figure stepped from the shadows. Zarkrath, his cybernetic eye gleaming with malice, blocked their path. "Did you really think it would be that easy?" he sneered. "That I would let you escape with the cipher?" Ricky's hand tightened on his blaster, but Zarkrath just laughed. "Oh, I wouldn't do that if I were you." He held up a small device, his thumb hovering over a red button. "You see, while you were busy playing hero, I took out a little insurance policy." Zeph gasped, her hand flying to her neck. "What have you done to me?" "A powerful neurotoxin," Zarkrath said, his voice dripping with sadistic glee. "One press of this button and it will course through your veins, causing unimaginable agony before it finally kills you." Ricky's mind raced, desperate for a solution, but Zarkrath had them trapped. "The cipher," he demanded, holding out his hand. "Give it to me, or the girl dies." Ricky looked to Hector, his eyes pleading for guidance, but Hector just smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "Ricky," he said, his voice soft. "It's okay." And then, before Ricky could stop him, Hector lunged at Zarkrath. The two grappled for the detonator, their bodies a blur of motion. Ricky raised his blaster, trying to find a clear shot, but it was too late. Zarkrath's cybernetic arm whirred and clicked, a panel sliding open to reveal a miniature laser cannon. It fired, a searing bolt of energy that caught Hector square in the chest. He crumpled to the ground, smoke rising from the hole in his armor. Ricky screamed, a sound of pure primal rage. He charged at Zarkrath, his blaster forgotten. They crashed together, fists and feet flying in a brutal dance of death. Zarkrath was stronger, his cybernetics giving him an edge. But Ricky fought with the fury of a man with nothing left to lose. They traded blows, Ricky's knuckles splitting, his ribs cracking under the onslaught. But he pushed through the pain, driven by a single, all-consuming thought: Ector. With a final desperate surge of strength, Ricky grabbed Zarkrath by the throat, lifting him off his feet. He spun, using the Nigen's own momentum to hurl him towards the shuttle's plasma core. Zarkrath screamed as he hit the containment field, his body disintegrating in a flash of blinding light. Ricky staggered, his vision blurring. He stumbled to Ector's side, dropping to his knees. Ector was still alive, but barely, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Ricky," he whispered, his hand reaching up to touch Ricky's face. "The cipher, you have to use it. Expose the Nigeans' plans. Rally the colonies." Ricky shook his head, tears streaming down his cheeks. "I can't, not without you." But Ector just smiled, his eyes drifting closed. "You can, you must, for all of us." And then he was gone, his hand falling away, his last breath escaping in a soft sigh. Ricky held him close, his body shaking with silent sobs. Zeph knelt beside him, her own eyes glistening with tears. They stayed there for a long moment, two friends united in grief. Then slowly Ricky rose to his feet. He picked up the cipher, his jaw set with determination. "Come on," he said to Zeph, his voice raw but steady. "We have work to do." They made their way to the shuttle's cockpit, Zeph's fingers flying over the controls. "I can broadcast the Nigen plans on every frequency," she said, "but it will take time." Ricky nodded, his gaze fixed on the stars beyond the viewscreen. "Do it. It's what Ector would have wanted." And so, as they raced through the void, Zeph sent out the call. The truth of the Nigeans' treachery laid bare for all to see. Across the galaxy, human colonies rose up in defiance, their spirits kindled by Ricky's message of hope and unity. The Nigean invasion faltered, their grand plans crumbling in the face of humanity's newfound strength. But the cost had been high. Too high. Ricky stood on the bridge of his ship, the rusty blade, his eyes haunted by the memory of all he had lost. But he knew he could not rest, could not let Ector's sacrifice be in vain. He would fight on for the freedom of all species, for the dream of a galaxy at peace. It was a heavy burden, but one he would bear gladly, in honor of his fallen friend. For in the end that was all any of them could do. Fight and hope and remember. In a galaxy torn by war and betrayal, it was the only way forward. The only way to keep the light alive. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.